21st Century Radio is sponsored by Hieronymus and Company. This is Talk Radio 680 WCBM. It's time now for award-winning 21st Century Radio. Here's your host, Dr. Bob Hieronymus.
One world, one mind, one love. We will find on common ground. Peace will be found for all on earth.
That's Oneida Elder, Joanna Shenandoah with harpist Bambi Niles. She is one wonderful lady, and you can follow for comments on her and others on Twitter and FB. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronymus, and our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner, and our engineer is Anita Brockington. In 1978, 79, and 80, my wife, Dr. Zahara, and I traveled to Egypt to establish a sister city relationship with Luxor and Alexandria, Egypt, at the request of our mayor, later Governor William Donald Schaefer, with the support of Egypt's President Anwar el-Sadat. Don Schaefer was a great admirer of the pyramids and Sphinx and later visited Egypt himself. Where our focus tonight, both hours, will be Dr. Robert Schoch and Robert Bauval's book, Origins of the Sphinx, published by International Traditions. Now, Robert Bauval, who's not going to be with us tonight, is a construction engineer, earned his higher national diploma at the University of South Bank, London, United Kingdom. He worked in many countries in the Middle East and Africa and began studying Egyptology in 1983. The author of numerous bestsellers, including The Orion Mystery and Black Genesis. He lives in Spain. Our guest tonight is, of course, Dr. Robert Schoch, Ph.D. Dr. Schoch is a full-time faculty member at Boston University since 1984. He earned his doctorate in 1983 in geology and geophysics at Yale University. In addition to his teaching duties, Schoch serves as the director of the newly established Institute for the Study of the Origins of Civilization at Boston University's College of General Studies. Now, in the early 1990s, Schoch stunned the world with his geological analysis of the Great Sphinx of Egypt, demonstrating that monument, as well as the walls of its enclosure, bears the scars of extreme water weathering and erosion. As Egypt has known hyper-arid climatic conditions for the past 5 millennia, Schoch concluded that the monument traces its origins to an earlier pre-Sahara epoch and a previously unidentified civilization, thus throwing a monkey wrench into the orthodox view of the rise of civilization. Well, back in 1992, Brother Robert broke that story here on 21st Century Radio. And the last time Robert joined us was to discuss his book, Forgotten Civilization, the role of solar outbursts in our past and future, also future. He also published by the international tradition. Geez, oh whiz tonight. Inner traditions. Friends, I got to tell you this. We have, for the last couple of months, we have been working overtime, day and night, finishing another book on the Yellow Submarine and working on the Woodstock bus, which is actually taking an enormous amount of our time right now. Well, that book was dedicated to his beloved wife, by the way, Forgotten Civilization. His beloved wife, Catherine, or Katie Ulysses, as being the inspiration and driving force behind that book, which could not have been written without her. Now, this isn't an exaggeration. Bob and Katie are an extraordinary team, which I admire greatly. Welcome back, Robert.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction.
Well, would you please share with us just why that book could not be written without Katie?
Well, she's not only an inspiration, but we discuss everything. And actually, one of the elements, one of the key elements, is the solar outburst that ended the last ice age. And really, I would say in many ways we discovered that together. And one of the pieces of the puzzle was that we went to Easter Island. We were actually married on Easter Island, so that's a personal thing. But something that Easter Island has is known as the rongorongo script. And the rongorongo script has puzzled people for decades, actually over a century, that it's been known. No one's been able to figure it out. What I have been looking at for much of my career is the end of the last ice age. What caused the dramatic catastrophe at the end of the last ice age? What wiped out the civilizations at that time? And we now know, and this ties in with the Sphinx, that there was a cycle of civilization and high culture, high civilization at the end of the last ice age. Plasma physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, Dr. Anthony Perrott, had started to put together that petroglyphs, engravings around the world, recorded what people saw in the sky during a major solar outburst, what's known as coronal mass ejections, solar flares, that type of thing, which caused the dramatic changes, the warming at the end of the last ice age. And something Katie figured out and put together was that not only the petroglyphs, and there are petroglyphs on Easter Island, but the rongorongo script itself reflects this, is a record of this. And since then, I have to say that colleagues at Los Alamos have confirmed that this is the case. So this all builds up the picture of what was happening approximately 12,000 years ago, because with my original work on the Sphinx, that pushed the date of civilization or earlier cycle of civilization back. I think we'll probably talk about that more. But what is really incredible, and I think also we need to learn from it, is that this early cycle of civilization was decimated 12,000 years ago, and we now know the answer to it, which was a major solar outburst, which, Katie was instrumental in putting all the pieces together. And I could say a lot about it, but I do want to mention this is not just sort of, that was interesting back then. This could happen again.
Well,
and I'm a geologist. Things that happened in the past do come around again, and cycles repeat.
Well, we want to award her a Ph.D. from Bullwinkle's Wasamatiu. Have you ever heard of Bullwinkle?
Yeah, but
Rocky and
Bullwinkle. The Rocky and Bullwinkle?
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
yes.
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yeah, they're good friends of ours.
Yeah, they're great.
They are. So we'll send her Ph.D. from Wasamatiu with all the other stuff we're going to be sending you in a little while.
Oh, wonderful. She will appreciate this.
So now she can be another doctor. I was amazed to see.
Dr. Katie.
Yeah, Dr. Katie. And 2018, I'm telling you, sleeping 2 and 3 hours a night and writing all the time is really something.
Oh, I know what you mean.
I'm in another world right now, and I'm so glad. Robert, I'm so glad to talk to you again. This stuff is important. What was that?
I'm sorry?
What were you going to say, Robert?
No, I was going to say the pleasure is mine.
No, it's mine.
I'm so glad to be back.
That was only a few years ago. I remember that there was a time when it went, because we'd been on the air over 30-some years, and there was a time when we hadn't heard from you for like 10 years or something.
Mm.
Well, before we start, I want to personally welcome any new Internet listeners that we have attracted tonight, and hope you come back for more every week and check out our free archives on iTunes. It's wonderful to have them absolutely free, that anyone in the world can finally afford them. And there are a lot of terrific shows over the last 31 years. Well, Robert, briefly, tell us about your new book, co-authored with Robert Bauval.
Well, Robert Bauval and I have known each other we were trying to figure this out. Well, let's say just around over 25 years, I would say. And in many ways, we've sort of gone parallel paths. We didn't know each other when we did our initial work, the very early work, but then we met shortly after that, probably about 92, 93. And I think I heard, was I first on your show in 92?
Yep.
Was that before the Internet, at least before the Internet was big?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so the world has changed so much.
It's changed terribly much, I'll tell you. Yeah.
It really has. But Robert Bauval and I have known each other since the early 90s because he, independent of I independent of him, were working in Egypt. He, of course, is known for the Orion correlation theory, which states, in very brief summary, and you can read more about this, the listeners can read more about this in our joint book, Origins of the Sphinx, but the Orion correlation is essentially that the three great pyramids on the Giza Plateau correlate with the belt stars of Orion in the sky, which was Osiris, the representation of Osiris according to ancient dynastic Egyptians. But not only do they correlate with the belt stars in the sky, but their position relative to the Nile reflects the position of the belt stars of Orion relative to the Milky Way in the sky, not in Old Kingdom time circa 2500 BC, but more on the order of 10,500 BC. And this suggested that the ancient Egyptians were thinking about that early period. It caused a lot of ruffles among the Egyptologists and other academics. So he was working on that. At the same time, or I actually got involved in it shortly after he did, I was working on the Sphinx. I'm a geologist. I'm not doing initially archaeoastronomy. What he was doing was archaeoastronomy and astronomical correlations, looking back in time at these correlations. I have been working on the ground geology, looking at weathering, looking at erosion on the Sphinx, on the Giza Plateau. I came to the conclusion, before I ever met Robert Bauval, really even knew anything about him, that the Sphinx had been weathered not by wind, but by rain, by water. This had to put it back into an earlier period before the hyper-arid conditions that we see on the Sahara today, the Giza Plateaus on the edge of the Sahara Desert. So this was pushing the Sphinx back thousands of years, just as through archaeoastronomy he was pushing at least something on the Giza Plateau thousands of years. And he couldn't say physically what it was, but he could see the correlations, and I was working and saying physically the Sphinx goes back to this earlier period. It turns out, based on the geology and other analysis, that some of the temples associated with the Sphinx go back to this earlier period. So we've been working in parallel. We've sort of been interacting. We were in Bulgaria a few years ago, spending a week plus together in Bulgaria looking at some ancient sites. We had been invited by a group there to lend our expertise, his archaeoastronomical expertise, my geological expertise. We're sitting in Bulgaria, having dinner, just chatting, and we sort of dawns on us, and he brought it up first, that why don't we do a book together on the Sphinx, on the Giza Plateau, putting our data together. And as he's always said to me, you know, it's one thing to have astronomical correlations that go back in time, but you really need physical evidence. So we thought, put together my physical evidence with his archaeoastronomical correlations to really make the case, I hope, for once and for all, that no one can deny the origins of the Sphinx go back to this much earlier, very remote period. And if, to put real dates on it, we're talking 10,000, 10,500 BC at least.
Well, that when you were reflecting or discussing the what was going on above in the heavens and then what was going on down on earth is, well, a wonderful demonstration of as above, so below. It's another form, another level of alchemy that was going on. Of course, Egypt was famous for that, but it's not usually discussed that way.
No, in fact, at least one derivation or one, and I'm not saying this is my expertise, but alchemy comes from Alchem. It comes from Kemet, the Egypt.
Right, the name Egypt.
So, I mean, that's where alchemy originated. Alchemy, whether it's chemical transformation or spiritual transformation, which, of course, both aspects, classic dynastic and earlier Egyptians were very interested in. I mean, not only interested, really the transformations was their prime concern.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Well, it should be our prime concern ourselves, our transforming ourselves from just the physical to the higher levels of consciousness, which I think is a good idea, don't you? I admire you guys so much.
Well,
you have made such a difference in opening up, especially. I'm sorry you get attacked by the what mob is that? That's called the not Psychop anymore because they don't exist.
Oh, I know. You mean the Skeptical Inquirer group, the Paradigm Police. They sometimes
Paradigm Police. Yes,
yeah.
I love that term. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, they're disappearing, so that's good.
Well, I hope they're disappearing, but
but they're not disappearing.
They feel that they have to uphold the standard conventional paradigm at all costs.
Yeah, they act like our president.
Don't look at evidence. Just repeat the dogma that you were told.
Yep. Well, let's get on with this. Bottom line, based on your analysis, how old is the Great Sphinx?
The Great Sphinx, based on my current analysis, goes back before the end of the last ice age. The end of the last ice age, if I could say it correctly, is 9700 BC, almost precisely, because we now know that from Greenland ice cores. There are literally Greenland ice cores where you can calibrate this. You can look at ice rings year by year by year. You can look at temperature changes. You can correlate that, as I was saying before the break, with solar outbursts. So we know that there was incredible climate change literally within a few weeks, maybe literally overnight, which is what you would expect from a solar outburst. That caused devastation around the globe, physical devastation, radiation, changes in climate, etc. And we see the results of that at a number of sites. But getting back to the Sphinx, I'm convinced now that the Sphinx goes back to before 9700 BC. Rough date has to be around 10,000, 11,000 BC. Based on Bauval's work, and since we're talking about origins of the Sphinx in our joint work, my geological dating of about, let's say, roughly 10,000 to 11,000 BC ties in with his archaeoastronomical correlations of about 10,500 BC. So I feel very confident about that, and we have other advanced cultures, civilizations now represented in the archaeological record that confirm that there was high society, sophisticated culture, civilization at that early period. I do want to point out two things, if I could. One, the head of the Sphinx is recarved. It is not 10,000 BC or thereabouts. It is much later. The dynastic Egyptians reappropriated the Sphinx, this great statue. The head was probably very, very weathered and worn and beat up. Apparently in dynastic times, I believe probably very early dynastic times, they recarved the head into the current human head. Mm-hmm. Actually, some people have argued it's been touched up several times since, or maybe even recarved a couple of times. But it wasn't originally the head that we see there now. It probably was not originally a human head. It was probably a lion, but I think we'll get back to that.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah, the other thing is that when you look at the body of the Sphinx, it's deeply weathered and eroded. This goes back because, it's 12,000 years old by my dating, but it's also patched up and repaired with chunks of limestone, with blocks of limestone. Some of those go back, even according to people like Zahi Hawass, the former Minister of Antiquities. Some of those repair blocks go back well over 4,000 years ago, more like 4,500 years ago. Some of the repair blocks are modern, literally from the last couple of decades. I've seen them put some of them in. But my point is that those are repair blocks. Again, those are much later. Originally, the Sphinx was carved just from the solid bedrock.
You know, I really enjoyed your analysis of the work of Robert and Olivia Temple.
Oh, yeah.
The Sphinx Mystery. Their book, of course, is The Forgotten Origins of the Sphinx. The only, you know, you did a masterful job. You really did. And it's, I don't, you know, I've known him for quite a while, and I've enjoyed his other ideas, but he's sometimes very weak in certain other areas. I know you don't say that. You're very kind. You're very
be kind. Yes.
You always have been, always will be, but you know he was not so kind. But
No.
that you know he was pretty mean. And the only way the anything difference in the sense of anything better, and he's not better, but the point is, he's got 564 pages. And you have, I think it is, what is this, 400 and some. Hey, you've got to put 492.
There you go.
You got to add some more to it to make it bigger. That kind of. But you did a wonderful job, and
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. No, because I mean, you know, I feel people, when I see something that's wrong or I disagree with, I have to, I don't want to be nasty about it, but I have to point it out.
Yeah, you have to, especially in that area. Yeah.
To be honest, and just for the viewers, the listeners that aren't aware of exactly what we're talking about, his theory about the Sphinx being Anubis at one point and having a moat around it that was filled with water, it just does not work.
Mm-hmm. As you pointed out, being filled
physically
with water,
impossible.
that the Sphinx would actually be sinking.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, you were on the receiving end of a lot of harsh criticism from your academic colleagues about 25 years ago when you first proposed the redating of the Great Sphinx, including at Boston University, where you teach. What is that situation like now?
Well, it has gone from a situation where, you know, I was attacked. I was called a pseudoscientist. People made all kinds of comments. It was really bizarre in hindsight because I gave presentations. I gave presentations to Egyptological groups, but most importantly, I gave presentations. This was back in the early 1990s to geological groups, in particular the Geological Society of America. And the geologists agreed with me. They always have. But they don't have a vested interest in the age of the Sphinx. I mean, it doesn't really mean that much to them because they don't have ego and whatnot tied up in it. But the historians and the Egyptologists in particular, they were just vehement. And they literally made up things. So they started trying to, badmouth me by saying that aliens from Mars or whatever came down and carved the Sphinx. I mean, they put all kinds of attributed things to me that were just not true to try to discredit me.
And some things that you never even talked about. You were
many things I never.
How do you like that?
It was so bizarre back then. And then at American Association for the Advancements of Science, again, this goes back to 1993, they had a big gathering about the Sphinx where I was invited to present the evidence for an older Sphinx. The Egyptologists, headed by Mark Lehner, were to present the other side, and it turned into a farce because all that the Egyptologists could say is that we know this isn't the case. Essentially, where we've studied it for hundreds of years and we know the date of it, blah, 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 but they didn't really present evidence, at least not cogent evidence. I presented the geological evidence. The Egyptologists, and I'll be blunt here, could not understand the geological evidence, much less the geophysical evidence. But one thing they did say, and Mark Lehner has many times been quoted since, this quote has been repeated. He said, well, if the Sphinx is so much older, where's there other evidence of civilization going back to that early period? This was 1993. Since then, we have other evidence. For instance, we have a site known as Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, and I talk about this not in Origins of the Sphinx, but in Forgotten Civilization, the other book of mine that you've mentioned. And I have a number of books, but Forgotten Civilization is very important in this context. And we now have evidence, incredible evidence of civilization, of sophisticated culture, going back before 9700 BC, before the end of the last ice age. So the current status is that they've started to be quiet. They still don't like me because I've upset and ruffled their feathers too many times, but the evidence is so strong that they can't really deny it. So what they tend to do is if you can't deny something, you just start to be quiet. At least they start to be quiet and sort of ignore it, or they try to downplay it. They sort of say, well, it's not really that sophisticated. They were just carving stone after all. They didn't have, iPhones, etc. I mean, it really gets ridiculous. But most recently, Boston University has even started to acknowledge me. I mean, there's still people there, I think, that would like to see me fired, but I'm tenured. They've started to acknowledge things. I've done a master class at their request for alumni that was sold out. As of last year, I've been allowed to found, although we still need funding, to be blunt, Institute for the Study of the Origins of Civilization, which I'm the director of. So it's very fledgling, but I feel like this is now making progress. It can't be denied. It's coming into the academic mainstream.
Well, congratulations, but there's still a couple of people I'd like to punch in the nose. Can I could I say? I'm going to mention their names.
I don't want to say that, but I understand.
Well, Edwin Crump.
Oh God,
Dr. Edwin Crump. What? Where did he get a Ph.D. that he had to be so? That was miserable. That was miserable and ugly, and he kept it up. Lied. He lied. You called him. He was even the BBC called him.
Yeah, exactly.
And he still goes on and continues to say stuff like that.
Yeah, this is the thing. The critics, the skeptics, the professional debunkers, the paradigm police, they are not above literally fabricating things, lying about things, personal attacks which have no basis, making up things, but also lying about evidence. Mm-hmm. It's incredible, and they think that people won't necessarily catch them. And unfortunately, too many people in the public arena, not our listeners, of course, but in the public arena, they're not critical. And I understand you can't have time to, look into every little controversy and dig deep into it. But,
well, then you have, of course, Dr. Zagi Hawass. Now, I don't want to upset you or anything here.
Yeah.
But if we hadn't had, if Anwar el-Sadat hadn't stood behind my wife and I mm-hmm. when we went to Egypt those 3 times, and when we spent some time with him here when he came to the United States, Zahi Hawass would have had us for, they'd thrown us in the gutter.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when under Anwar Sadat, this may not be too special to you, but it was special to us. When we first, one of the third time we went there, we were allowed to go all by ourselves and spend time in Tutankhamun's tomb.
Oh, absolutely. That's special to anyone.
In 6 hours, we were there.
Wow.
And we just meditated there, and boy, did that make other people there a little bit upset. And he was not happy about that. Like, who's this Dr. Hieronymus coming in here and spending time here, and it's not that I'm under a first-name basis with Sadat, but he knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
And without his support, we would have been, who knows what would have happened to us, to some of those people.
Absolutely.
All right, we're returning with our guest, Dr. Robert Schoch. And, one thing. Robert, you're very dear friends with John Anthony West.
Yes.
How is he now?
Well, he has been up and down, up and down. For those that don't know, what we're talking about is that he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Let me think about the timeline here. It was about a year and almost a year and a half ago, because a year ago he was scheduled to lead one of his famous tours to Egypt. This was February. So just about a year ago of 2017, he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. He was feeling weak and whatnot. The end of, I guess it was 2016. And ironically, he and I and Katie and his son Zeke, his adult son Zeke, had all been in Egypt for a good chunk of the summer in 2016. He seemed fine then. He was actually proud that he'd lost some weight, et cetera. It turns out the weight loss was, I'm sure, associated with the cancer. And he just could not, he was in a hospital. He's been in and out of hospitals. I took his tour, more or less. I led his tour that he could not lead a year ago. I took off and did that so that, the people who had signed up for it wouldn't be disappointed, and that, he and I have worked so closely together in Egypt all these years.
So is it?
We've spoken with him recently over the phone, but he's very, very weak. I'll be honest, we didn't think he was going to make it into 2018 at one point, but he rebounds. But then, it's up and down. It's up and down. It's a very serious situation. I just don't, on the one hand, I want to be hopeful, but I also don't want to whitewash it or sugarcoat it. He's in very serious shape.
Well, we'll say our prayers and send him some
Absolutely.
more.
I know he appreciates that.
And send him some more money.
And hopefully he's
this
not
is
going
costly.
to become a star too soon. You know that the Egyptians thought that when we die, we can become stars or we can reunite with the sun. And actually, there's good scientific evidence for that now, but that's another topic for maybe another.
That's right, and Doctor, your wife,
yes,
Dr. Katie. Dr. Katie, she knows all about that.
She actually originated or has worked on, and we're working on together. And there is I don't want to go off on a tangent now, but there's very good evidence, I believe. Serious scientific evidence that stars and other things that we don't normally think of this way do have a level of consciousness, that hydrogen, et cetera, can carry information. And this really gets to some of the fundamental, should we say, perennial questions.
Yeah. Well.
And it's amazing that the ancient Egyptians were addressing these also.
Well,
and these were things that, West and, I call him West, John Anthony West and Katie and I would talk about, and it all ties together.
Well, wait till the Paradigm Police go after you on that one.
Oh, gosh, yes. That's why we won't go too far right now.
That's right, they'll beat us up.
But, the world is not what the Paradigm Police want it to be.
No, and it ain't going to be.
And we've seen this for centuries and centuries. They didn't want the sun. They wanted the sun to go around the earth, not vice versa. Mm-hmm. And look what the Paradigm Police did back then to people. I hate to use. I don't like comparing myself and putting myself in such categories, but look what they did to Galileo.
Yes.
Look what they would have done to Copernicus if he hadn't made sure that his major work was published as he was on his deathbed. Well,
it serves him right.
Yeah.
Who does he think he is anyway? No, I'm sorry, but it's like these are all old friends. Gosh, or Rudy, I'm 74, and it gets kind of weird after you get to a certain. How old are you now, brother?
Oh, well, I'm 60.
You lucky guy.
It's all a matter of perspective, isn't it?
Well, I know, but I remember people when I was 50 years old, and they came up to me and they would say, I can't wait to become your age. Fat chance, geez whiz. Wow, when you're younger, everything is so different, and the world we're moving into is going to be so great. It really is. We got a way to go. After we get rid of this president, we're going to have a lot of way to go.
Exactly.
But we're going to go there, and that's the way it works. That's karma. It's called karma.
And it's interesting because, of course, I teach college students, and their perspective on the world, so much different than when we were their age.
Mm-hmm. Well, gosh, Rudy, now you're just talking to your phone, and you can you can record anything, send it out. It's just, well, look, we got to get back to work here.
Yeah,
now,
exactly. I was going to say one thing. John Anthony West is, I can't say, I think he's going to be turning 86.
Oh, God
and
bless
he
him.
always wanted to live to 120 because he's still got so much to do. So let's hope that he does.
Yep. Well, we'll send him some more money. I think it's the bills and something like this are just astounding.
Oh, they're absolutely astounding.
Yeah.
That's it. It's. I mean, in all seriousness, it's horrible, and I don't want to go off on a different tangent because we have to get back to the subject matter. But we're in America, so we don't have the health care system that many countries have, etc.
That's true. That's true.
And so a lot of this becomes a private burden.
Yeah, especially, what's really worse about it is the way children are taken care of in that regard. Oh, we do got to stop because we'll never finish on that. But this past summer, you published a paper with.
Yeah.
Oh, now how? I'll try to pronounce this. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Manu Saves the Day.
Saves the day.
Saves the day. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like saves the day.
Hey,
Manu
good old
saves the day.
Manu saves the day. Of course. I knew him.
Dr. Manu saves the day. And this is very interesting because he is actually, he's a doctor, but he's a physician. He's a dermatologist. Is his specialty dermatology. But like many people, when I say many people, it's not that many people at this point, but people who are, in many cases, very good and very gifted, should we say, and have really studied Egyptology, it's not their main profession. It's really an avocation. It's really, something on the side. And I would put him in that category, which is actually not to belittle him, but the opposite, because many of the professional Egyptologists, of course, they go through Egyptology 101 and 102, et cetera, so they become very stuck in the dogma. They become, card-carrying members of the paradigm police versus people who don't have to do this for a living but can do it for the pure intellectual enjoyment, become very, very talented. Mm-hmm. So what I want to say about Dr. Saves the Day is that he is a really talented when it comes to various aspects of Egyptology, reading the hieroglyphs, interpreting them, et cetera, et cetera. So he actually made the initial discovery here. He made the discovery that there is this Old Kingdom title. It's known as a dual title because it has two parts to it, and it actually refers to archives under the Great Sphinx, and at that time it refers to the Sphinx as Methit, the lioness. Methit, mm-hmm. She was a goddess that took the form of a lion, and this title, a couple of very important aspects, this title, which can be translated as the king's chief librarian and guardian of the royal archives of Methit, that title not only goes back to Old Kingdom times, but it goes back to Khufu, the reputed builder of the Great Pyramid. It also goes back to the earliest dynasty, the earliest records that we have, preserved hieroglyphic records, about 3,000 plus BC. The point being that both Khufu and certainly 3,000 plus BC, that's well before the standard Egyptological attribution for the Sphinx. The Egyptologists claim that the Sphinx was carved de novo from scratch from the bedrock in 2500 BC by Khafra after the Great Pyramid was built. We now have another piece of evidence, in this time textual evidence, these hieroglyphic titles, which is repeated. A number of overseers or, high-ranking officials held this title, referring to the Sphinx, we're convinced, when I say we're convinced, the paper was written by Dr. Saifzadeh, Robert Bauval, and myself. The three of us ended up collaborating on it, co-authoring it together. And this ties right in with our book, Origins of the Sphinx, that we have textual evidence indicating that the Sphinx existed prior to when the Egyptologists say it was supposed to exist. Not only that, there was an archive that it guards. Well, put that with the data that I collected geophysically with Dr. Thomas DeBecke back in the 1990s. We did seismic work around the Sphinx to measure and model what is underneath it. We found a chamber under the left paw, which has to this day not been explored. At least if it has been, no one knows about it if it was done surreptitiously. But officially, it's not been explored. That's where Edgar Cayce predicted there was going to be a Hall of Records. That is what the title now says that Dr. Saifzadeh first discovered this summer. Or discovered it about a year ago, and then we published this summer.
It was our very dear friend Dr. Zahi Hawass that is not too happy about your trying to get under that left paw of the Sphinx.
No, he's not.
And
well, and I don't know why, except that I think it comes back to what we've started to talk about in this past hour, which is the paradigm police, and whether he's officially a member of them or not, he certainly does his job.
Acts like it. Yes, he does.
Guarding the paradigm, and I believe he could well be scared, either a conscious or unconscious level, or both. That if you go into a chamber under the paw of the Sphinx, what are you going to find? It may overturn your cherished beliefs.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. You must have been thinking about this a long time. Long time. But right now, we're thinking about, we have to take a break now? Oh, it's the top of the hour. That's the top of the hour already, brother. Okay, time out here on this playing field, friends, with our guest, Dr. Robert Schoch, Ph.D., Origins of the Sphinx, Celestial Guardian of the Pre-Pharaonic Civilization, written with Robert Bauval. Inner Traditions, drrobertschoch.com.